I was at the pinnacle of my career. I had a solid job and a bright future ahead of me. At the time, I felt I was in control of my fate and that no one could alter it. In December 1990, I worked hard to organize the wedding. That was the course I chose and the strategy I devised. On Good Friday, April 13, 1990, we had the day off. We chose to visit Carmel and Monterey. We started out in the morning from San Jose and arrived in Carmel at midday. We spent the day wandering throughout town, relaxing on Carmel Beach and eating in Monterey. That night, we were returning to San Jose. I recall turning to face my fiancée and catching her grin. I glanced around and saw the headlights. It was a catastrophic head-on crash, and I was the only survivor. I experienced a near-death experience after seeing my fiancée walking toward a bright light and just following her. But as she stepped into the brilliant light, she turned back and said, "You can't come because you still have work to do." I instantly felt a weight and found myself in anguish with blood on my body when she stated that. I saw her on the passenger side dashboard. I reached over and pushed her back into her chair. She had no visible wounds and seemed to be in good health. When the first ambulance came, I instructed the paramedics to take her first and I'd wait for the second one. The doctor arrived to inform me that there was nothing they could do to rescue my fiancée since she had suffered a significant brain damage after the second ambulance carried me to the hospital. I was completely speechless when I heard what he said and had no idea how to respond to such dreadful news. My mind and emotions both froze at that point. I collapsed because I had lost my desire to live. I was a live corpse who was breathing yet contained no life. I was lying in the dark and chilly emergency room, completely helpless and lost. I was startled to hear a booming voice proclaim, "Con DTNH, ta NHot," which translates as "You plan things, I make them happen." This Vietnamese adage flashed into my mind, "Mu es tai en han, than es tai thin," which translates as "Man proposes, God disposes." At that moment, I understood I was hearing God's voice, and I vowed to do His will since He had given me a second opportunity on earth. The agony was tremendous, like if someone had torn open my chest and taken out my heart. This is the best I can do with words to convey how I felt, and I know only those who have experienced it can comprehend the severity of the anguish. We were not wearing seatbelts at the time. It was a marvel that I made it out alive, much alone without any major injuries. Because the airbag was not deployed, my chest may have been crushed by the steering wheel. My right knee was sliced when I collided with the gear stick, but it was not broken. The cops informed me that one contact lens remained on the windshield. As I struck the windshield, my eyes were opened. It occurred so quickly that I didn't even blink, and I realized exactly what this expression meant. In the blink of an eye, everything changes. This strong reminder not only had an influence on my life since that night, but it also served as my reset switch. Since then, anytime I find myself in a terrible position, confront unfathomable odds, or face urgent dangers, I repeat this reminder in my head. As a result, I just obey the Lord's instruction by formulating plans based on my existing situation as well as my limited understanding, and then watch how He makes things happen. When I was in the spiritual world, I discovered I no longer had any physical senses since I no longer had hands to touch, nose to smell, tongue to taste, ears to listen, and eyes to see. Surprisingly, all of these sensations merged into one. I realize it's tough to convey, and only someone who has had an NDE would understand. The only way I can describe it is to use the ultrasensory channel idea. The soul has this USC that allows it to perceive and experience everything. Using the computer as an example, the soul is equivalent to a system with complete access to the data structure. However, when this spirit enters a physical body, it must plug in and use local sensory equipment such as the ears, eyes, nose, tongue, and skin to access data. The soul may access numerous components of the data structure via this framework in the form of sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. As a result, this soul no longer has the USC and must depend on the limited sensory channel. For example, the naked eye can detect what it can see, but if an item is too small, it will not be seen. Although the human eye cannot see all of the germs or live creatures in the air, they are there. The human ear can hear sound within a limited frequency range, but there is a data transmission spectrum that it cannot perceive. When a soul remains tied to its body, it must work within the limits of the host's LSC. I had to remain at my brother's home after being released from the hospital since my mother was unable to care for me. One night while sleeping, I saw myself strolling up near a palace, and from a distance, I could see a throne inside. As I neared the gate, there stood a creature who resembled a royal court elder. He welcomed me and escorted me inside the castle. As we approached the main hall with the throne in the center, I noted that there were 24 elders in total. When I arrived to the throne, there was a dazzling light with such a great presence that I couldn't bear looking up. I knelt and had a strong feeling of reverence. This elder said that I was brought here to take on a mission. The throne's voice inquired whether I would volunteer to be an effective testimony to God's grace and love. It was not a question in the traditional sense of the term. The question arrived as a data packet with the terms, instructions, and previews, so I understood precisely what I agreed to. I was given a book in which I may interpret the scripture that I would be referring to. However, I eventually recognized that it is a diary or written record of what I collect as a testament of God's mercy and love on my earthly journey. This task was accepted by me. Following that, I prayed and begged for a sign of permission. Because of my Vietnamese heritage, I requested the symbolic king's sword as a demonstration of God's authority. A close friend surprised me by paying me a visit and presenting me with a magnificent cross. She informed me she saw this cross and felt compelled to acquire it for me. I always have this cross with me. I instantly spotted my fiancée in front of me at the time of collision, just after seeing the two headlights, so I followed her. It seemed like I was rising up towards a light. When we got close to the light, she turned around and said, "I have to go back because I still have stuff to do." I was in front of a light source that may be defined as the Most High's tremendous presence. I didn't feel threatened, but I did experience a tremendous feeling of profound respect. My portrayal of the light is the closest since human language cannot adequately express this experience. This light was not blindingly bright when I encountered it. Most of us would think of the dazzling light that provides warmth and calm. In my case, this light consists of authority, compassion, joy, peace, and knowledge, just as a rainbow consists of blue, red, violet, yellow, and so on. Because I come from a military background, I'll take a situation from World War II as an illustration. Consider a soldier in a Normandy beach landing battalion who is called by Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allies. Every soldier in the assault force had heard about General Eisenhower. When this soldier reaches the command post, he is overcome with emotion as he salutes the general and feels privileged to see him in person. There was no fear since he was confidently and courageously carrying his commands. Similarly, there is a feeling of love and respect when a soul is in the light or God's presence since we are all his children. Despite having a vivid NDE, I still battled with emotional and psychological stress. In my book, The Art of Resilience, I recount a low period in my life when I couldn't take it anymore and sought to leave this planet. I slid further into despair, solitude, misery, and suffering after the accident. I had reached rock bottom and determined to end my life. I had a number of severe suicide thoughts. At first, I considered driving over the cliff, but then I realized that God could easily rescue me from that accident, just as he had done before, so I stopped. Then I intended to let the water take me, but then the thought of God sending someone to rescue me occurred to me, and I realized I needed to find another method. On the third try, I decided to take a bunch of medications and sit in my garage with the engine running. My fiancé emerged as I was ready to start the vehicle and exclaimed, "You don't love me. You're so self-centered." The image perplexed me. Then I saw the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "Just consider all the hard work and sacrifice I've made to offer you another opportunity to be my instrument. What makes you give up so easily?" My mind was clear and my heart was at ease after hearing this message. I started to concentrate only on the reason God had kept me here. I'm referring to the capacity to access the data structure because there have been occasions when a special access key was provided to a certain individual, and this individual can see or hear things that regular people cannot. For example, Saint Bernadette saw and spoke with the Lady of Lourdes despite the fact that the throng couldn't see or hear anything. At Fatima, 3 youngsters, Lucia, Francesco, and Jacinta, saw and spoke to the lady in front of hundreds of people who couldn't see anything but recognized the presence. We also have several testimonies from doctors or nurses who cared for dying patients who said they could see their departed family members before they died. These spiritual entities are everywhere around us, but we can't see or hear them with our bodies LSC unless we have the permission key to access higher layers of the data structure. On my trip, I've discovered that one of the various methods to gain this permission key in order to improve our data access capacities is to open our intuitive potential. This NDE data was stored in my subconscious mind as I arrived and identified the spiritual world. In a way, this location or spiritual address is forever saved in my soul's GPS database. As a consequence, there is no more apprehension about dying. When I complete my tasks here on Earth, all I have to do is remember this spiritual address and go there. According to my observations, we travel the spiritual level using our thoughts. The closest analogy I can think of is a dream we experience when we sleep. In your dream, for example, you were wandering along the beach, enjoying the sun and air. The sound of the alarm jolted you awake, and you found yourself back in the chilly, wet night. However, you may recollect the dream and return to this gorgeous beach in your imagination. This is one of the reasons why certain faiths instruct us to think about heavenly or to separate from earthly bonds or to concentrate on a guide such as the Buddha, Christ, or divine being at the time of death so that our soul might exit peacefully. When we have numerous unsolved concerns with ourselves, family members, society, and so on, it is difficult. Anger, hate, greed, shame, misery, power, selfishness, or anguish entirely take over, and we lie there drawing our last breath with these ideas as the last address or destination to which our soul is traveling. We throw our soul into an unending cycle in this condition, and there is no way out since the only info accessible is about anger, hate, greed, guilt, agony, power, selfishness, or suffering. I was overcome by the powerful waves of profound anguish ripping and tearing at my heart. This extreme emotional anguish overtook me to the point that my body, the exterior shell, was entirely shut down. I was completely numb and couldn't feel anything at the time. Several weeks later, I begged the Lord to share and allow me to feel the suffering He endured on the cross. I had a vivid dream that night of being sentenced and executed on the cross. The weight of my body, the agony of my extended arms and nailed wrists, and the battle to breathe were among the tortures I endured while hanging there to die slowly. However, I realized that the exterior discomfort was not as severe as the interior one. In reality, I contrasted the exterior to the interior suffering and understood how tiny it was. The Lord showed me the many degrees of anguish. The anguish of losing someone we care about much transcends the physical hurts or wounds caused on the body. The Lord conveyed to me the depth of my grief as a consequence of the death of a loved one. If I multiply it by the millions or billions of lives He adores, the beating, lashing, crown of thorns, and nailing to the crucifixion become unimportant. Those traumas and tortures would, of course, be exceedingly painful to the physical body. The emotional scars and mental tortures, on the other hand, are considerably more damaging and profound than the physical suffering. It took me almost 30 years to discover that everything occurs in accordance with the divine plan. One day, the Lord showed me a vision of a massive chessboard with the pieces of galaxies, stars, planets, governments, families, and living things covering the whole universe. All of these parts are moving in unison with the rest of the system. We can anticipate how one move on the chessboard may affect the other pieces, perhaps changing the game's fate. I was really furious and resentful of God for the first several months following the disaster since He did not give me 1 second to rescue both of us. I knew God could easily have prevented the accident in under a second, but He didn't. I completely overlooked my own hubris and vanity when I stated more than a week ago that I am the ruler of my destiny, and that no one can alter my fate. God enabled me to vent my wrath, feelings, sadness, and sorrow, just like a loving and wise father would. The accident occurred so quickly that it impacted my life forever. After the accident, I often examined this 1 second time slice under the microscope to understand that God could have modified any one of them to avoid the accident, just as He did on many other occasions to preserve me. However, He did not do so on that fateful day. When the Lord shows the same 1 second time slice involving the 2 inebriated guys whose souls were on a collision path to awaken my soul, He broadens my viewpoint. It was also a marvel that they were able to drive since they were so inebriated. Actually, it was the driver's spirit that took the wheel in order to achieve his destination. God transported my soul to a war-torn nation more than 60 years ago. In Vietnam, I learnt and adapted to chaotic and unpredictable conditions. After moving to the United States, I worked hard to put myself in charge of a great job and a bright future. But because of my arrogance, God had to bring me back to his office on the night of April 13, 1990. After this deadly head-on accident, I recall police officers noting that given their blood alcohol level, they couldn't imagine these two individuals getting in the vehicle, much alone driving it to the motorway. I was in charge, and they were supposed to meet you that night. I vividly heard God's voice declare,